wonder from down under!
Released on September 23, 2002 in North America, and early 2003 elsewhere, Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, or as it's known in European parts, Sly Raccoon, is the first in a seminal trilogy for the PlayStation 2 developed by Sucker Punch Productions. A name that may prove to be recognizable as the developers of both the infamous series and the hugely successful Ghost of Tsushima. Though a company that could be considered a pretty big name nowadays, they didn't always have that same level of pedigree. For back in October 1997, when Sucker Punch was initially founded by several ex-Microsoft employees, they had set to work on a 2-year-long development cycle for a game for the Nintendo 64. Initially, this was to be a game named Puzzle Factory, which was inspired by an old computer game named The Incredible Machine. But this would ultimately be scrapped in favor of a 3D platformer by the name of Rocket Robot on Wheels. Although this game would receive positive critical reception, which has furthermore translated into this game's cult classic reputation, it did not perform well commercially. Said positive critical reception though still inspired the devs to have another crack at a character action game. From the beginning, they had settled on the protagonist of this new game being a raccoon thief, which the game's producer, Brian Fleming, has stated was inspired by a sight gag of a raccoon wearing a mask.
We started with the idea that we wanted to do an action game where the primary character was a thief. The choice of a raccoon was a pretty natural fit in terms of, obviously the mask being in place, being, as Dev would say, a creature of the night.
From there, they developed this raccoon thief character further, initially intending it to be the very same raccoon who was the villain of Rocket, Jojo, which translated into the character's codename being JT, for Jojo Thief.
It's like one.
Do you read me? Yeah, Bentley, I hear ya.
Ultimately, the Raccoon Thief's design would be revised into the final version you recognize today, and with that he would be given the final name of Sly Cooper. And as Sly's design was altered, so too was the design of the world he inhabited. A fairly common misconception I see regarding the game's art style and tone is that it was meant to be purely cartoonish in nature. Granted, it would be not only difficult but also foolish to argue that there's no cartoon influence to be seen here. Aside from the developer's own statements as such, there's also the matter of the game's unique rendering style, known as toon shading, which the devs compare to animated movies in how it renders animated backgrounds with cel-shaded foregrounds.
We very early on wanted to make a game that looked and felt like a cartoon, but was one step closer to realism rather than flat and graphic. We started experimenting with different ways we could bring this character to life. Cell shading, how to make it feel like a cartoon but still feel like a great 3D game.
We want it to actually look like it was inked and painted. And we want the backgrounds to be, really lush and have a painted look, so it looks like it's a living animated episode that you've been thrown into.
Make no mistake though, while the game style is quite comparable to a cartoon, it is in fact more directly influenced by film noir and in particular comic books, which can be seen not only in several areas of the game's presentation, such as the cutscenes, but also in the fact that actual established comic book artists have worked on the art for this game, such as Dev Madan, who has worked on several Batman and Ben 10 comics, and Travis Kotzebue, who has namely worked on the Dungeon Crawl series. So I've talked a big game about this game's influences and development, but how does the finished game that we got reflect on this? Well, no better way to find out than to see for ourselves. Well, after sitting through the logos for the game, we are treated to the same intro sequence that you saw at the beginning. Certainly a cool sequence, isn't it? Showing our title character travel through the desolate rooftops of Paris, all while displaying his expert thieving skills under the cover of night, only to expertly conclude with a seamless transition into gameplay, which we can engage in with a simple press of the start button. I wonder how could the game possibly follow up such a cool display as that?
Sly! Come in! Sly! Do you read me?
Yeah, I read you. Loud and very loud.
I'm telling you, man, this game's the work of geniuses. So this gentleman here is Bentley. He's both the brains of Sly's outfit, as well as an accomplice who regularly pops in to offer advice, as he does so here.
I've got to steal that file from Inspector Carmelita Fox.
Well, count on me to be your eyes and ears, buddy. Got their security system totally scoped. To get inside, you're gonna have to go through that air vent.
All right, I'm going in.
And don't forget you got me at the wheel, Sly.
Oh yeah, can't forget about Murray. He drives the team's van. Yep, that's all I've got for him. Well, with your partners introduced and your objective given, you're free to roam around this rooftop to your leisure, as well as come to grips with the controls, which I guess now's a good time to talk about how good they are. All of your actions, from running, to jumping, to swinging your cane, have a generally good weight and flow to them. Once you've gotten sufficiently used to the controls, you can travel up the railing on the right to move on. As you travel down to your objective, you'll be introduced to several common game concepts, including these areas marked with a blue aura that you travel across using the circle button, areas marked with lasers that you need to dodge whilst looking for an alarm to disable them, and last but not least, these vaults which require a code given to you by Bentley to open.
Try dialing in 937.
Nice job! You got it! If you come down through the fire escape and head through the parking lot, we'll be waiting in the getaway van.
With the police file in hand, you'd probably think it's a shoo-in for the home stretch. Alas, there is one more obstacle to contend with.
Criminal! You foolish raccoon. I've caught you red-handed.
This is Inspector Carmelita Fox, an established member of law enforcement. She's naturally a rival and thorn in Sly's side, as she continues to be here.
Hey, you know, that bazooka really brings out the color of your eyes. Very fetching.
You think? This pistol packs a paralyzing punch. You ought to try it. Might snap you out of your crime spree.
And give up our little rendezvous?
Plenty of time for that once you're safely behind bars.
Love to stick around and chat, but I just dropped by to pick up this case file. I think you've had it long enough.
And thus the chase is on. But fortunately not for long. Just run down the aisle of police cars and make it to your team van, and you're home free.
You can't escape me, raccoon!
In the following cutscene, we see the Cooper gang analyze the fruits of their labor, and we also get further information regarding Sly's background. He explains how he came from a long line of thieves, who have for the longest time kept their secrets and techniques in an ancient book.
The Thievius Raccoonus. Anyone who read it learned to be especially sneaky, which is why we specialize in stealing from criminals. After all, there's no honor, no challenge, no fun stealing from ordinary people. You rip off a master criminal, and you know you're a master thief.
Although Sly was next in line to inherit the book from his father, these plans were cut short by the Fiendish Five, a group of 5 infamous criminals who invaded his home and then took the Thievius Raccoonus for themselves. Losing his family and his inheritance in the attack, he was sent to an orphanage, but it was there that he met his 2 closest friends and lifelong crew.
Bentley, techno genius and strategist supreme, and Murray, part-time driver and full-time burden.
With his partners and skills at hand, he intends to track down the Fiendish Five, defeat them, and steal back their pieces of the Thievius Raccoonus.
I knew I was about to face the toughest test of my life. On this mission, I would either become a master thief like my ancestors before me, or fail and allow my family name to bite the dust.
With your objectives introduced, you're sent to the hideout. Here you can talk to Bentley to watch previous cutscenes you've seen, or you can select one of the available maps to go to the next episode when applicable. Or if you want, you can interact with Murray.
Oh! You want... one?
As I said, the work of geniuses. Upon selecting the first world map to be taken to the first episode, Tide of Terror, you'll become acquainted with the game's general structure. Each of the game's worlds has 7 levels to complete. Within each of these is a treasure key to find, which is the game's method of gating off progress to the boss. Treasure keys are in that manner comparable to the crystals in Crash Bandicoot, and indeed the structure overall is comparable to Crash, which I personally don't mind one bit, but I do think how it attempts to deviate from said formula is strange in how it's executed. Compared to Crash, where each level in a set area is available to choose as you please from the get-go, Sly has you start off each world with one mandatory opening level, from which you then transition into a hub world, from which you can play 3 or so levels in whatever order you please, and collecting a certain amount of treasure keys from these levels will open up a progression gate, after which the rest of the world's levels become available, at which point you are required to beat all of them to be able to access the boss. There's nothing wrong with this per se, but I do think it's weird how they present it as though you have a choice as to how many levels you want to beat, before then requiring you to beat all the levels anyway. I personally think it would have made more sense if each world had like 9 or so levels to beat, and then you were given a requirement to get 5 treasure keys in one world, then 6 in the next, then 7, and so on and so forth. But to be fair, the requirement of having to add extra levels to account for this would probably not be too reasonable, and the structure works fine enough as is. Aside from getting the treasure key in a level, in most of the regular levels in the game, i.e. the platformer levels, there are 2 extra objectives to complete. The first is finding all of the clue bottles in a level, which are comparable to the crates in Crash, wherein you're able to obtain a collectible after getting all of them. Specifically, getting all of the clue bottles will decipher a code, which you'll obtain to use at a vault found somewhere in the level, and by entering the code you'll get none other but a page from the Thievius Raccoonus, and with it you'll gain a permanent upgrade, which can be anything from an unlockable move, such as the knockout dive or roll maneuver to move around faster, or you'll get a permanent passive upgrade, such as immunity to bottomless pits and drowning, or the ability to collect coins from farther distance. This I think is a really cool addition that spices up gameplay a lot. Even if what you actually get from the pages isn't always great, just the experience of unlocking them is still pretty cool and good. Lastly, the third objective is performing the Master Thief sprints. These are directly comparable to the time trials in Crash. Now in Crash I thought these were pretty cool, and an interesting method of adding replay value, but I'm not so sure about how they're executed here. For one, unlike Crash where the timer counted upwards, in Sly the timer counts downwards, and you're kicked out of your run if the timer counts all the way down to 0, which as you'd imagine harms the flexibility of these a little. Also unlike Crash, you don't have a method of slowing down or stopping the timer, for example collecting coins to make the timer go slower. In fact, the timer will go down faster if you trigger an alarm, Alas, even if I don't like a few elements of the sprints, they are still perfectly beatable, and the reward you get from them is actually pretty awesome, which would be developer commentaries that you can toggle on at the start of a stage by pressing L1, and you can listen to as you play through the stage.
So this is the approach leading into Raleigh's Store Machine boat, and this is one of the first levels of the game we made, and it has been gone over and over and over, and as the characters changed, as his jump length changed and jump height changed, this level got changed too.
So that's everything you can do in the basic platformer levels, but there's a few more types of levels in the game than that. The most common alternate gameplay style takes the form of a twin-stick shooter, which you naturally control with the left stick while shooting with the right stick. Though the controls remain the same, the premise varies between each iteration. You can either be shooting underwater, protecting treasure chests from crabs. The next you're traversing a bayou in a high-tech blasting vehicle while shooting up ghosts. The next two common gameplay types both involve Murray, funny enough. One of these takes the form of an escort mission, where Bentley sends out Murray to get a treasure key, and Sly has to protect him using a turret. You might wonder why we're going to all this trouble to help Murray get the key instead of just having Sly get it himself, and funny enough there is actually an explanation for that, but I'll get back to it later. The second takes the form of a racing segment, wherein you have to use the fan to race around the track 3 times against 5 set opponents for a key. These racing missions aren't the worst thing in the world, but they're hampered significantly by the decision to have the controls mapped entirely to the left stick, including both turning and decelerating, instead of having accelerating on the X button. You do have turbos that are littered around the stage that you can use with the square button, so there's that. Overall, despite having some misgivings with it as I've stated, I find the gameplay overall to be pretty strong and engaging in this game. But of course any game can have strong and engaging gameplay, so what elevates this one in particular in my eyes? Well, I think I can pinpoint that down to 3 particular areas. The first area, I guess, could be neatly summed up as presentation. Graphics, aesthetic, atmosphere, what have you, basically how the game looks. I can safely say the toon shading style that Sucker punched about for this game did wonders for it, granting the game a near timeless look that's able to accurately and expertly portray multiple environments, from the dark and dingy areas of the Welsh Triangle to the calm and serene snowy mountains of China. The great aesthetic appeal of the game is also further backed by the great animation work, particularly on Sly himself, who is naturally made to be as sneaky and thief-like as possible.
Once we got to that part where he kind of evolved into what he is now, my main job was to take him and try to put every bit of thiefiness into him that I could. He was kind of tiptoeing, and he's really like rearing back to like ease his foot forward, trying to keep all his weight back so his foot falls softly on the ground, and really try to hone his personality through subtleties in the movement and really try to push the thiefiness.
The second area I'd say would be in the game's music. Sly 1's soundtrack was done by the late Hashif Hakik, who had also previously done the soundtrack for Fantavision, Tomba 2, and Crash Nitro Kart. I recall back when it was announced that he died back in April this year, that people were reminiscing on his previous work, namely from Nitro Kart. Needless to say though, I mainly associate him with his work on this game, and I can safely say that he does a pretty damn good job at it, being neatly capable of matching both the game's aesthetic and atmospheric sense. To give an example of such, I will play a few samples of songs I consider highlights from the game. Certainly, the music is plenty good on its own, but what really elevates it in my eyes is the game's dynamic implementation of it. This game, I believe, set a standard on using dynamic music in games. While the concept has obviously existed in some form or another before in video games, I think this game really set the bar with how it dynamically ramps up and down as you play, depending on the situation. And lastly, the third aspect of the game I'd like to talk about is the story and the characters behind it. Upon hearing how the story goes, one might initially claim it to be formulaic. And sure, I suppose when you look into it there is a formula to be seen with it. Sly pinpoints a member of the Fiendish Five, goes to whatever country they're residing in, gets all their treasure keys, promptly beats them up, and takes their pages of the Thievius Raccoonus, which permanently teaches him a new ability, which usually requires jumping and pressing the circle button to use.
To get over the next gate, you'll need to grab onto this hook using your cane. Just jump and hit the circle button.
Got it. Jump and hit the circle button to grab onto hooks.
To landeth safely upon diminutive points, leapeth lively and presseth the triggering device with the round geometrical object emblazoned upon it.
So jump and hit the circle button to land on narrow spots.
That's a rough translation, but do not forget, Sly. You have to get close.
Then hit the circle button to grab it. Yeah.
All you gotta do is
jump and hit the circle button.
Sly, you jump and press the circle button.
And indeed, a lesser story might have made this feel formulaic, but I think this game clears that hurdle thanks to the great characters behind it. Starting with, well, Sly himself. Already, he is characterized well in gameplay by his actions and animations, but what truly elevates him to greatness is both the great dialogue for him, as well as the great performance by his voice actor, Kevin Miller. As you'd expect given his characterization as a romanticized thief, he's naturally cocky and arrogant to both friend and foe.
I found a way out to Raleigh's hideout, but unfortunately, it is doomed to failure.
You're not gonna tell me I have to shoot myself out of that cannon.
I'm afraid that's the only way.
Now you're talking.
You're really scaring me, man.
But he's also surprisingly capable of buckling down and taking on a more serious tone, adding an extra dimension to his character.
Why should you care if I bury a few worthless village in snow? You are a thief, just like me.
No, that's only half right. I am a thief from a long line of master thieves, while you're just a frustrated firework artist turned homicidal pyromaniac.
Insolent child. You shall pay dearly for your disrespect.
Bentley is also a pretty great character. Not one that gets to do quite as much as Sly, given that he primarily occupies the background. But he does get plenty of chances to interact with Sly through the Binocucom conversations, backed by a good vocal performance by Matt Olson.
Sorry, Sly, but this is one mission you will have to accomplish without me.
You don't believe in ghosts, do you?
Sure I do. My scanners have picked up verifiable paranormal activity. But that's not the problem. This swamp is oozing with disgusting mold and bacteria.
Suck it up, Bentley. We got work to do.
All right, then.
Now, compared to the other members of the Cooper gang, Murray is kind of lacking as a character. Not that he's bad or anything, he's fine. And backed by a good vocal performance by Chris Murphy, he has a few entertaining bits of dialogue with Sly.
Hurry, what are you doing down there?
Well, I'm minding my post when I notice a snow cone stand, and I think to myself, hey Murray, you gotta keep your energy up. So I hurry over here, and then all of a sudden, monkeys are everywhere, bugging me to race them 3 times around this track for a key.
I could use the key. Think you could take them?
Come on, Sly, they're a pack of monkeys. How can I lose?
But regardless, I think most will agree that Murray doesn't have an awful lot going on character-wise in this game. Which, evidently it seems wasn't always supposed to be the case. In behind-the-scenes videos and footage for the game, the devs describe Murray as having a specific character arc, that of being envious of Sly, to a self-destructive degree.
Murray has a huge case of Sly envy. He wants to be Sly in the worst possible way, and he has absolutely none of the capabilities to do it.
And this character arc for Murray was actually supposed to be the justification behind his escort missions, as seen in prototypes for the game. Murray is described as having headed out on his own instead of being sent out by Bentley to get the treasure key, seemingly in an attempt to prove that he's just as capable of getting the job done as Sly. He was also actually originally characterized as being gay, or at least sexually curious.
You know, one sheet of paper for each character, the whole list of things about his personality, one of which was sexual orientation. And I remember Murray's as being, like, experimenting or something like that.
Are you serious? I don't remember that, but I believe it.
I'm thinking, okay, well, here's a big, gay, pink hippo with a little vest and no pants. So, you know, I figured I would just do a voice like this. Hey, Sly!
This original tone of voice for Murray can still be heard in both some unused files in the final game, as well as in the prototypes.
Way to go, Sly! You got it! If you come down the fire escape and head through the parking lot, we'll be waiting in the getaway van.
Apparently, the reason why all this characterization for Murray was scrapped was because the game testers interpreted him as being like Barney the dinosaur. Yeah, no kidding.
The issue that was explained to me wasn't that it was two gays, that people didn't get that he was gay. That they played it for audiences and testers, and all the teenagers are like, oh yeah, he's supposed to be like, what's the dinosaur? The big...
Barney?
Barney. This
Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yeah.
Well, it ain't Barney the purple dinosaur!
Whatever the case, it seems this characterization was scrapped quite late in development, as not a whole lot was put in its place, as can be clearly seen with the finals escort missions, where Murray is sent out by Bentley to get the treasure keys, instead of just having Sly get it like he does the rest of the time. Well, as I said, it's not the worst thing in the world, and for what it's worth, this characterization here that he does have would serve as the building blocks for how he would develop further in later games. Still, shame that you couldn't have a more prominent showing in this first game. Outside of the Cooper gang, the next major character would be Carmelita. She doesn't get to show up very often, but when she does have some entertaining dialogue with Sly.
Well, 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 look who just walked into my crosshairs. Sly Cooper.
About time you showed up, Miss Fox. Was getting worried about you. Thought you took a wrong turn somewhere back in Paris.
The only one making wrong turns is you, Sly. I'd suggest you surrender before I paralyze you with my good friend, the shock pistol.
Now see, a girl whose best friend's a firearm's got issues. A little dinner, a little dancing. I think I can help you out.
Sounds romantic. As long as you don't mind dining in jail.
Nah, I hear the service is lousy.
Once I catch you, you'll know for yourself.
The levels that involve Carmelita take the form of chase levels, which naturally resemble the chase sequence at the beginning of the game, but also resemble the boulder chases characteristic of Crash Bandicoot. Whatever the case, they certainly make for an interesting change of pace and tone. With the main four aside, the next most important characters would naturally be, of course, the villains, the Fiendish Five. They're certainly an interesting bunch, and they vary greatly in both design and development, whether it be Raleigh, the rich aristocrat who became bored of being a rich aristocrat and became a pirate instead, or Mugshot, the runt of the litter turned mean gangster boss. Though for how much they're built up, they don't actually get many chances to interact with Sly, though they certainly do try to make the best with what time they have, be it through the intercom announcements throughout the stages, or through their brief dialogue at the start of a boss fight.
How delightful! We have a guest. The only thing is, I hate unexpected guests!
Listen, Raleigh, wipe up my family and steal what's mine? You better expect company.
Oh, I'm ever so sorry. How sloppy of me not to finish the job. Obviously, we should have snuffed you out as well. So, without further ado, let me make amends by what? Bloating to gargantuan size and squashing you like the insignificant bug that you are!
Bring it on.
What? My boys have been yapping about some big mysterious dude running around cracking skulls and this is it? You're the monkey wrench in my operation? Some scrawny rat with a stick. Wait a second. I seen that stick before.
Maybe when my father knocked your block off with it.
Your father? Wow. You're a Cooper? You know, that Thingus Rackamagookus had a lot of nice pictures, but way too many big words.
So you don't mind just handing it over?
What, are you kidding? You break into my place, steal my stuff, trash the joint, I feel transgressed and violated.
I could feel that Cooper vibe a-coming. Most distastefully bad juju.
Yeah, well, you give me the creeps too, lady. Cooking up an army of ghosts isn't a very neighborly pastime.
Oh, Sly. I see your mouth a-moving, but all I hear is blah, blah, blah. Well, if jaws need to flap, then let them flap.
Speaking of bosses, there's also what happens at the end with the last member of the Fiendish Five. And what would that be? Well, why don't you play the game and find out? Hey, you didn't think I was gonna tell you everything, did ya? The first Sly Cooper game is one that for the longest time I've held in high regard. Certainly, it might not be the most revolutionary or important game around, but it is one that I believe set a standard for games to come, and I simply think it's a good game overall. But I guess that should be apparent given how much time I spent talking about the game. Indeed, this is the longest video I've released on this channel yet, but definitely worth every second to talk about this game I hold dear to my heart. One that you could even say stole my heart.